So for the shadows, I'm using the same color that we used for our darkest value in the orange. And the darkest area is going to be where the orange for the mandarin, sorry. And it's going to be where the mandarin actually touches the table. The same way here. Like so. And then we will go into a cool shadow. So this is a bright blue. That we will mix in together with the umber. So I'm adding this blue here as well. And now we can start blending. The further the shadow gets away from our object, the less intense it's going to be. And it kind of fades out into the color of the paper, so into the table. Here I'm blending this edge together with my mandarin. And then pulling the color out into the color of the paper. So if here I went out too much, you can always correct the shape. Okay, and the same thing happens here. Blending the two together here, so we don't have any sharp edges at the moment. So one thing to remember about shadows is that the shadow is influenced by the color of the object. So the color of the object is always going to influence the color of the shadow. And also here, there is a shadow happening here, and I see that there is more shadow, more darkness here. And again, I'm adding the blue. So you can see that we have a colorful shadow now happening. So with this blue, on the edge of the shadow, where I see this edge of the shadow, I'm going to add more of this blue. So we kind of add more color into the shadow and it doesn't look as dull. And blending it out. Same way here, adding just a bit of blue on that edge of the shadow. So we're creating this contrast between our orange mandarins and the shadow. Now I'm going to take an even darker brown and add that area where the mandarin touches the table. So kind of intensifying that part. Like so. Even adding this color a bit into the mandarin where it touches the table, and then don't worry, we will get to the reflected light as well. And here the same way, I'm adding this to intensify the color, to intensify the value. So I'm adding it here. Like so. And very carefully blending it into the color of our shadow. If you don't manage to blend it with your fingers, you can use paper stumps our color shapers, like so. So basically the goal here is to create that colorful shadow which doesn't look as if it's pasted onto the paper. And I'm gonna add a bit of this darkness here onto my mandarin as well. Okay, and not to forget the area here. Same. I'm going to also just bump up the value difference between these two oranges here, between the light and the dark, so that we create more contrast. Okay. Now, to get back that reflected light, I'm going to use my midtone value. And above here, I'm going to add a little hint of that reflected light, very gently. The same way here, not immediately after the occlusion shadow, but just a bit above it, like so. Also here. Here I'm gonna add a bit more lightness to this edge and blend it away so we know that there's the edge of this peel happening there. And I'm going to take a bit of blue and add it into my orange here, into that reflected light. Now you will see why I'm adding blue, because we will be adding this light blue, so this kind of a grayish blue into the paper, into the color of our surface, the table. It's not going to be completely white. If I went in too far, if it got too light, I can always go back into my shadow color and darken it up a bit. Okay. So here I'm going to add a bit more of this brick red to create this cast shadow and this beautiful contrast between this light part of the segment. Okay. And also here I want to just slightly intensify that shadow. Went in too far. I'm gonna take this yellow color and go back with it. So pastels are amazing that you can go back and forth at creating those values. I see that on this mandarin we have a bit of green, so I'm gonna add just a bit of that green, just a hint, just so that our mandarins don't look so boring. Again, where it's too much, you can always cover it over with another color. So you can add the same, a bit of green happening also here, maybe to have some patches of green, even though we don't have it in our models. We can still add this green just to create more interest. And in the shadow area here, I can add a bit of this darker green mixed in together with this brick red. Okay. Here I see that I smudged it a bit, the color here, so I'm gonna just erase it with the kneaded eraser. Again, the shadow has to gently disappear in the color of the paper. So now we can add the lightest value into our mandarin, so just in those few places where we see it. Here it's darker. Okay. And also here, a couple of dots in that highlight. Like so. And then here we have that area also where the peel has its thickness, as we were saying, that it has to have a thickness to it. Like so. In the shadows we have less detail, so have to remember to not to add too many details in the shadow areas. So darkening up this area here too because it's turned away from light.